Dan Fletcher. I'm the CFO of Planful. I've got my Planful half sip on here. Planful is a platform that actually serves CFOs and their teams. It's a financial planning and reporting platform. And so if you're curious, want to get out of spreadsheets, you find us. That's my shameless plug. But look, I'm here today because I'm a CFO and I'm a relatively new CFO. I've been a CFO for 4 years. But in that time, I've had quite the experience. You know, if you think back the last 4 years, we had one period of incredible growth from 2019 to sort of March 2020, and then one black swan event and the fallout from the terrible pandemic that's sort of still around, right? But I kind of call that period March 20 to December 20, and then we again rebounded for great growth 2021 through March of 2022. What is it about March, by the way? And then we saw the markets experience significant turbulence, geopolitical instability, the inflation, the rapid interest rate increases. And so I've had quite the ride as a CFO across 2 companies, done 2 add-on acquisitions, rebuilt 2 teams, and I will say had 1 baby also during that period of time and another on the way. And so I think that Nivas invited me on here because for any of you on the webinar who are hoping to be a CFO, it's helpful to talk to someone who sort of recently went through that transition only 4 years ago. It's still sort of fresh on my mind. And also I've had a little bit of an interesting career as a CFO, being that the turbulence of the last 4 years. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all for joining us. I know it's not easy to carve out an hour on a Thursday.
Right. Hey, thank you so much, Dan, for coming on board, agreeing to doing this. I think we met, was it last week or the week prior to that? We met at the Oracle NetSuite World, and we were super excited to be doing this. And I also have something small coming up for all the attendees over here. But before that, I think I'll just do a quick introduction about, first of all, welcome to the webinar on the journey to CFO. And this is being brought to you by Spendflo. Spendflo helps companies centrally procure, manage, track, and save on your SaaS spends. We guarantee up to 30% savings on your SaaS spending with about 2x to 5x ROI. We have a lot of customers across the globe using our solution to kind of help save on their SaaS spends. I'm going to skip the introduction on Dan because Dan gave a way better introduction himself. But I think just the overall thing, right? Like what we really loved about his career is with multiple high growth and PE-backed companies, being a CFO, and also led companies like MarkLogic through acquisitions. And also, I know Planful had a recent acquisition. I mean, you folks did an acquisition of Planner, the marketing planner software. So I think there's a lot for us to go through here. But I think before we get started into the actual conversation, if any of you are in San Francisco or the Bay Area, we're hosting an in-person fireside chat with Dan and Anil from Airbase, who's again a CFO at Airbase on November 10th. So I'm going to request Medha to probably drop the link in the chat if any of you are interested and are in SF, San Francisco or the Bay Area. Please go ahead and register. We'd love to see you there. But I think, yeah, Dan, just moving on to the actual topic, right? What do you think are maybe a typical or a typical career path, or maybe how do you accelerate your career path to kind of get to a CFO? What is needed? What are the skills? And I think I'm just going to put a couple of questions in there, but yeah, I'll leave that to you, Dan.
Yeah, and so I think we can make this a 3-minute webinar, because I'll just say the best way I think to fast track yourself to becoming a CFO is maybe go to Harvard for undergrad, maybe go straight to Harvard Business School, HBS, right after. Don't even take a break in between. And then about 6 months before you graduate, call your mom, who's a senator, and ask her if any of her friends have a CFO job. And there you go, right? And so there are clearly some people who have a quick track, and the rest of us who need to find a little bit more of a traditional path, right? So jokes aside, I think it's a really fascinating topic, and I think we could do probably 2 hours on this, Nivas. And I did take some time to reflect on it ahead of time. And I think the very short answer is it depends, right? And of course, that's a classic CFO answer, caveating myself, but it depends on the industry, the company size. Is it public? Is it private? Is it a manufacturing business? Is it a software business? But let's take all those factors out of it and just take a generic CFO role. I think that is probably most applicable and probably why most people showed up to this webinar. For a generic CFO role, what's the quickest, most high probability path into that seat? And I think I break it down into four aspects, really, right? And I would say those four aspects, to me, it segments into sort of education, certifications, that's one, professional experience, that's two, your network or your connections, and then your leadership or your soft skills. And I think any one of those four, so education, professional experience, network, and leadership skills, I think any one of those could be like an hour webinar, right? But so let me just pause there and give you some air to comment on that, Nivas.
Right. And do you think how has your career journey been? Like, I mean, would you just be able to help us? What took you to the CFO level there, or what was like some pivotal moments in your career that made it happen for you, Dan?
I actually like this. So this is what's called riffing for the folks on there. So we're riffing right now. So I kind of established this framework across these four factors that influence how quickly and the probability with which you can get to become a CFO. And Nivas has turned it on me. And that gives me an opportunity to comment on which of those four factors I was able to take advantage of. And so let's go very quickly through. So education, I got a undergrad degree, so a bachelor's in finance and accounting, and then got my master's in accounting. And then I also got my CPA certification. So that was my education. And then in professional experience, and this is something I'll touch on if we have time, Nivas, it's all about being well-rounded. And so the CFO is a role that's multiple disciplinary, both within finance and without, and more operational. And I can get into that. But what I mean is there's no one track that you can commit to, whether it's accounting or finance or ops, that will get you there. You have to cross-pollinate. And I was able to do that sort of by accident, although I think my 20-year-old self thought it was very intentional. But I started out at PwC as a classic sort of advisory audit role, right in the teeth of the Great Recession, actually, in 2008, which was an interesting time to enter the workforce. I pivoted from that after 3 years into investing for 5 years across at the GP level and then also at the PE level, and then shifted into an operating role, which I'll call corporate finance, right? So I did a bunch of work for PE-backed companies and sort of VP finance, director of FP&A roles, and that teed me up for becoming a CFO. So when I look back across that professional experience, I think, okay, I was able to get the right accounting experience. The fundamentals of the CFO role are accounting and compliance. Without that, you have nothing. But I was also able to get the M&A experience, which is a big part of many CFO roles. And then finally able to get the broad finance, forward-looking, planning, forecasting, budgeting, analytics experience. And that allowed me to shift into a CFO role as a first-timer. And it gave the confidence of the people hiring me because I had covered all those disciplines. I think that was largely unplanned, but like I said, my 20-year-old self would say I got this all under control, totally intentional.
Right. I think just moving a little more into what is your current day look like at Planful being a CFO? Then what do you manage, or what do you take care of?
Yeah, absolutely. And so at Planful, I have, and this is actually an interesting topic, is what teams roll up to CFOs, because that has changed over time and it differs by industry and company size. But at Planful, I have the classic accounting, finance teams, and then I also have legal. And then I also run our corporate development. And we just, as you highlighted, we just did an acquisition back in September of a marketing performance management company. If you have a lot of marketing spend, check it out. Another shameless plug. And so the day-to-day just depends on what's going on. Over the summer, while we were dealing with that acquisition, obviously it was highly confidential at the time, probably up to 70% of my day was spent meeting with the management of that company that we merged with, and working with our private equity sponsor and dealing with the lenders and getting the financing locked up. But in a normal sort of day, when we're not in planning season or doing an acquisition, it's going to be largely collaborating with other executives. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people mistake when they think about what it means to be a CFO. Is they think, okay, a CFO is sitting there, hands on the keyboard, being highly analytical, working through different scenarios. And, I love that stuff and I miss it and I enjoy it when I get to do it. But the vast majority of my day is spent in meetings and on calls, whether it's with customers and prospects or my other executives and bosses.
Right. So I think you touched upon this a little where you said, but I'm going to kind of iterate the question on what do CEOs or investors or board of directors look for in a CFO? You said about being well-rounded, probably there's a lot of communication with the other execs, right? Those could be 2 pointers, but I think apart from that, how does a CEO or like the board pick a CFO, Dan?
So I think this is an area where we could get better. We being the business community broadly. I think that over the past 10 years that boards and CEOs have gotten very enamored with CFOs that come from the finance side of the house. And what I mean by that is CFOs who sort of have an FP&A background. And while that is unquestionably hugely valuable as a CFO, we've sort of lost the thread on the fundamentals of accounting and tax and compliance. And I mean, that's in many ways, I think what led to the Lehmans and the Enrons of the world is CFOs without the fundamental grasp of their accounting and their business and their compliance. And so that to me is table stakes. And so if I'm looking as a board member to hire a CFO, I want to map out my sort of job spec and my requirements, but very near the top are the things that are going to make me sleep well at night. Does this individual have what it takes to be constantly diligent and vigilant on compliance, on environmental controls, on spend and capitalization, on the reporting with our lenders, on covenants, on all these things that matter and can tip the company into the courts or worse, to bankruptcy. And that's very real. I mean, the CFO, Navas, is one of maybe 2 employees that on a daily basis could kill the company, right? And I say that, and I know it's extreme, but you could really screw up intentionally or unintentionally enough, along with the CEO, such that the company would be in risk of a going concern issue. And so, that individual has to be fundamentally sound, trustworthy, ideally not racing Formula One or leading a super risky lifestyle or something like that. And then all the rest of it is additive, the ability to be really thoughtful, forecast, understand the industry, advance the ball, go find and close on add-on acquisitions, raise capital, lead us through an IPO. These are all things that kind of depend on your thesis for the business, your growth plan.
Right. I'm going to quickly drift into one of the audience questions because that talks about, you spoke about how critical it becomes. So as CFO, do you ever get a downtime? And before you answer that question, folks, I see a couple of people raising their hands on the panel. Please use the Q&A portal to kind of ask questions and we pick them up on live just to answer these questions. So we're going to have like a lot of questions being picked up live over the course of the webinar. And we'd also be picking up the first question as well, Dan. How would a VP of accounting or controller need to make the leap to CFO as well? I would love to have the answer for that one as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great question. It's really the topic du jour, right? If you're an accountant, you feel exposed that you don't have the FP&A experience. If you're an FP&A person, you feel exposed that you don't know how to close the books and deal with compliance and sales and use tax and all that stuff. And so I actually went in the chat and dropped a link to a blog I wrote on this, answering the very question. And by this, I mean, what are the critical skills that an accountant needs to become a CFO? And I broke that down in that blog, which you can all read, but into kind of 3 buckets. You need to be able to do financial modeling. And financial modeling is a multidisciplinary activity, right? It could be something as simple as an ROI or a rent or a lease buy or a sales capacity model, but you need the ability to ask questions and answer them by manipulating data into an answer. And that's the kind of a simple way of saying financial modeling. The second thing would be you need to understand how to budget and forecast. These are things that happen on a monthly basis in most businesses, annual for budgeting. And if you're unable to lead a company through that, and trust me, it's primarily a human task, primarily a political collaboration task, then you're a little bit exposed. And then the last thing is just analysis of information. You know, on a daily basis, I am served and I ask for it a bunch of data, typically leading indicators, and I'm looking across those to identify patterns that might impact decisions we make in the coming week, in the coming quarter, in the coming year. And when you're sitting in the controller role or the accounting manager role, you are 100% maxed out, probably overworked, focused on things like month-end close and making sure that you're managing FX the right way and making sure that you've got vendor accruals right. And so it's very, very hard to get exposure to those three things, the financial modeling and the analysis. But I'm telling you that if you want to be a CFO, you need to carve out the time and the space to get exposure to those other activities. And that could be by taking a course at Stanford at night online, or it could be by asking your CFO, telling them, listen, I'm not a flight risk here, but years from now, I want to be a CFO. And so I want to get involved in the budgeting cycle. Give me a simple task. Let me wrangle CapEx for this budgeting cycle, but let me participate in the workflow meetings of the budgeting process. Slowly but surely, you get to speak the language, you get the battle scars, you get the cycles under your belt, and that'll be hugely valuable when you're interviewing for a CFO role.
Right. I'm going to do a shameless plug over there. You spoke about vendor approvals, and if SaaS vendor approvals are a challenge, we're here to help. Spendflo does that for a lot of companies, where we help companies manage their SaaS spends and their SaaS approvals. But I think, Dan, I'm going to come back to the second question over there. As CFO, do you ever get downtime?
Well, as a CFO or a father of a 23-month-old, I don't know, right? I don't know which of those is more taxing on your time, but I would say, look, yes, the short answer is anybody who tells you they get no downtime is lying to you, right? We all have the ability to create space for ourselves, and it just you have to be intentional about it. And so I do work on weekends. I do work at nights. But I think it's important to say that when I need the time to carve it out, the benefit of being a CFO is you've really just got one boss. It's your CEO. And if you have the right relationship with your CEO, you've established trust, you can no question be a little bit more discerning with your time than many folks in the business. You know, if I need to go pick up my daughter at 3 p.m. on a Friday, who's going to tell me no? Right? As a CFO, there are very few people who are going to do that, not to be crass, but so yes, there's a little bit of downtime, but there's no question it's a demanding job. Any one of those things, finance, accounting, legal, or corp dev, is really a full-time job. And so it's heavy. By the way, Nivas, I saw someone ask the question, is CPA required?
Yeah,
I believe I found on Journal of Accountancy, they're great, by the way. Journal of Accountancy publishes all these stats about the profiles of CFOs. Something like 44-45% of CFOs are CPAs. So the simple answer would be no, it's not required, but it is very helpful, no question. Especially if you're someone who comes up through FP&A, if you can also have a CPA that covers that blind spot in your experience, that's hugely valuable.
Right. So just reiterating the question for the audience, Divya had asked the question, is CPA certification really a mandate to be a CFO? So that was the question. And so Dan, moving on a little, right? Like what, according to you, differentiate, my question was, what differentiates a good CFO from a great CFO? But how do you think it is to, become like a great CFO? Right? Like what can you do better?
Oh, okay. So the question, if I understand it, is how do you go from good to great as a CFO, sort of the Jim Collins model? So this is a fun question, and so I would say a good CFO is someone a gal or a guy who checks all the boxes in the job spec. So who closes the books on time, who stays compliant, who gets the annual budget done and approved by the board and drives adherence to that budget and guides the company and shepherds the company on a path toward achieving its goals. That is a good CFO, and that is hard to do. Just to be clear, that is a big job. And I'm not denigrating someone who is able to be a game manager. For those of you who follow sports, who follow the NFL or college football, a game manager quarterback is someone who doesn't throw interceptions, doesn't fumble the ball, gets you 5 yards at a time, and gives you a chance to win most games, right? I think a great CFO is an innovator, an advisor to the CEO, a partner in crime, someone who brings ideas to the table, uncovers opportunities, and provides the ability to exploit those opportunities. And so that would be someone who can help you, for example, buy a company, get that done without needing to hire an investment banker, someone who alerts you that you have an opportunity in Asia Pacific, right? Listen, the ability to open up business in Asia Pacific is a skill, right? It is complicated. There's a lot of red tape. If you have a CFO who can tell their CEO, you want me to do it, I'll do it. We'll get it done in a month and a half. That's a huge skill. So someone who's an innovator, breaks down barriers, Nivas, I think is what it takes to be a great CFO. But critically, a great CFO must also be a good CFO, must still close the books, must still keep compliant, must not suddenly have a big whammy because you failed to collect sales tax in Georgia for 5 years.
Right. So we have one question from Srinivas. How much influence does the CFO have on revenue, which is driven by sales?
A significant amount of influence. And so the CFO, so first of all, revenue is driven by how much product you have to sell and how many people you have to sell it. These are things that the CFO is instrumental in determining in the budgeting process. And so fundamentally, the CFO has their hands in everything in the business. All the material numbers that measure a business, the CFO will have been involved in, even if it's way upstream, right? In terms of the planning of how many people you hire. On a day-to-day basis, in terms of closing, in terms of being involved in the sales cycle, it really depends on your industry. I'm involved with certain approvals around payment terms or discounting. I'm also an executive sponsor on certain deals. I'll get involved in deals where it's a big multinational and they want to understand the financial profile of Planful, which is very good, by the way. And so I enjoy those calls. But I'll get on and talk them through our finances, our plans for the business. Will we IPO someday? That's not material non-public information. We have no imminent plans, by the way. And so it's really dependent on your industry. But I would say the CFO is quite involved with revenue.
Right. And I think given that we're talking about career growth and other things over here, one major area is finding a really good mentor for yourself and probably learning from them, asking them the right questions and working with them pretty closely, right? How do you go about identifying, if you did have one, or what would you recommend for the VPs or the finance controllers on identifying good mentors for themselves? Dan?
Yeah, so Nivas, if we think back to our framework at the very beginning, the four pillars, or 4 factors, right? We covered professional experience and education pretty well, I think, so far. The other 2 I had said were your network, which would include mentors, and then the last one is your soft skills, your leadership skills. And so just keeping us organized here, now we're going to the 3rd factor, right? And that network, I cannot stress, it is highly likely your first job as a CFO will come from someone in your network who knows you. Let me just repeat that. You are very likely to get your first CFO role from someone who knows you, knows your past, and trusts you. That's because of what I said earlier. A CFO is one of 2 people who can screw up a company. And so let's just use my case in point, right? I had worked as a VP finance under a CFO in a business that in the medical device manufacturing in north of Atlanta. And we had a great experience, worked there for 1.5 years together and built deep trust. That individual subsequently went to work for an investment firm that would ultimately own Planful. And I was brought in at Planful from an introduction through that mentor of mine. And so, you could call it luck, but I refuse to call it luck in the sense that it really is about investing in your relationships, keeping an open door, meeting people, shaking the right hands, giving back of your time when someone wants to chat through their own career. These things really do have sort of a pay it forward impact on your career. And that network, as cheesy as it sounds and annoying as it sounds, it's not just collecting business cards, it's investing in relationships, and they really do bear fruit. Certainly as much for a CFO as any role out there, I think, the boss.
Right, right. So Henry has a very interesting question over here. When should a company hire a CFO versus a head of finance in an early stage? What are the real differences between the roles, or is it mostly a level or a scale difference?
Yeah, I think you can start with head of finance or VP finance. It really is a CFO, a chief financial officer is someone who I would say is you have to have like 10 to 15 minimum years of real war experience in the trenches to deserve that title. And I'm kind of waffling here a little bit because I'm pick my words carefully. So if you're a startup, what you probably don't want is some very seasoned conservative CFO. And I'm being very careful here. It would behoove you to get someone who fits into the mental energy of what you're trying to do as a startup, which is often scale rapidly, be creative, disrupt, work long hours, be underpaid, at least from a cash compensation perspective. And that lends itself toward often people earlier in their careers. And those folks, you're not doing them any favors by slapping a CFO title on someone who nobody else would slap it on, right? And so I think it makes a lot of sense to bring someone in as director of finance, VP finance, give them a path, critically give them a path to CFO, say, hey, here's what the roadmap looks like you. In 2 years, we're going to do our Series B. We just did a Series A, and then we're going to do Series C. And right around Series C, we want to name you CFO. And here are the things that are going to happen. You got to get us through that Series B. We got a triple, double, right? T2, D3, whatever. And then we'll give you CFO. And everybody wants to earn the role. I think the boss is what I'm trying to say here. So I think it's smart to hire someone as VP Director of Finance in an early stage business, but give them a path to the CFO role.
Right, right. We have one question from Anthony here. In your experience, what do you think the proportion of internal focus, month-end or process improvement versus external focus in organic growth or industry analysis in the CFO role is?
So internal focus, closing the books versus external, analyzing the market. Oh boy, it's a tricky one because it's super dependent on the company's situation. Are you acquisitive? Are you international? I think it's still probably 80-20, 80 internal. Closing the books is not a huge portion of that 80%. Maybe only 20% of it. And then you spend a lot of your time meeting, strategizing, iterating on plans, making investment decisions, making decisions about your strategy. That's the lion's share of your time. And as a part of that, you're looking outward, certainly at the competitive set, at markets, you're monitoring interest rates, you're monitoring the demand environment. So I'm being very squishy here, Navas. I'm not answering the question properly. I would say it's a heavy emphasis on the internal focus and that you care about the metrics of your business. But in order to contextualize those metrics, you're very often looking outward to understand, to benchmark, to contextualize them.
Right, right. And there's a question here saying, it's more of a, if given a chance, what's one certificate or course you'd like to do from which B school from a finance leadership perspective? Is there a course that you'd recommend or would you take yourself?
Yeah, so right now I don't need it, but I think the myself 4 years ago, I would say that often financial professionals, for whatever reason, I think because the job is spent so much time looking down at your computer screen, don't develop really good muscles for collaboration, for interacting with other execs, and for making the tough decisions and trade-offs, the soft skills. And so it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I would say whatever courses you can get in executive leadership training are extremely helpful. And that's across all the disciplines, across presentation, being confident in the boardroom, but also listening to your executives, learning to manage your emotions, using things like the communication wheel, which is something you can look up. And I got all of that from an executive coach. And I do attribute that to her, my development in those areas to her. And I know it's made tangible progress because I got 360 feedback on it, right? And so, but to tug on more technical topics, I am fascinated by all things venture and startup and early stage. And so on a personal level, I would probably go to Stanford and take one of their, early entrepreneurial courses or VC style courses. But it really can't hurt, by the way, to just make sure you're buttoned up on whichever of the disciplines, be it FP&A or accounting, that you don't have a spike in. That's what I would do if I were you.
Right. So then I have one question. Given the current overall macro situation and the economic downturn that a lot of companies are going through, how do you recommend CFOs prepare for this, or what is maybe your recommendation on this, Dan?
Yeah, it's weird to say economic downturn. So the markets are down. I think we just don't know yet, right? It's a big question mark. Most of us, I think, are expecting some type of somewhat of a recessionary environment here for 12 to 18 months at a minimum. But none of us have a crystal ball. I was talking to a prospect earlier today, and I was saying this is a weird planning cycle, FY23, because we, for the first time in the last 4 years, we actually are aware that we don't know what's going to happen. At the beginning of 2020, we had no clue. We did our plans. We thought we had a good beat on the year, and then Black Swan event hit, right? And then in 2021, we had absolutely no idea how great that year would be from a growth perspective and a demand environment. But we didn't know that at the time. This year, we know we're disabused of any notion that we can actually predict the year. And if you get it right, you're probably lucky. And so to me, this year is all about preparedness, and that means running scenarios. So you're going to have a plan that you bring in front of your board. All you VP finance out there, you director of FP&A, you CFOs, whoever on this call is in annual planning right now. First of all, I'm with you. Solidarity, be strong. But what I will tell you is that it behooves you to have your plan that you're seeking board approval for, but let them know, hey, listen, we have also run 2-3 downside scenarios and 2-3 upside scenarios for completeness, right? And in the event that we miss Q1, we miss Q2, here are the things that we are going to do or not do to maintain our profitability targets, so that there's no drama out there in the wild when these things happen. It's all about preparedness this year, Nivas.
Right. And I think I have one, probably this is my final question before we jump into some more of the audience questions. How do you think the future of the CFO role, or maybe future of finance, looks like, Dan? I mean, what do you think is probably changing or going to change stronger?
Well, from a demographic point of view, I think it's getting more diverse, it's getting more female, and these are all just macro trends that I think we're all in support of, right? So the typical profile of a CFO is getting more diverse, I would say. The actual role itself, I think, is shifting and has been shifting more toward, in a weird way, a CTO. There's a huge technology component to most CFO roles now that is really, really not talked about enough. So I think over the last decade or two, the role became more strategic. You heard, and I myself have given talks on this, the modern CFO, right, is someone who's more forward-looking, isn't a book nerd anymore, isn't sitting there on their 10 key. And I think that is baked. That's part of the job now, right? The CFO is meant to be the forecasting guru, the kind of the Merlin in King Arthur's court, someone who sits there and looks forward and thinks about opportunities and risks. But the next wave of CFOs are very tech savvy. Everyone in our generation of us grew up with an iPhone or an Android, right? And so we're technology natives. And I and my teams, we look to leverage technology at every single opportunity we can to automate away manual tasks so that we can spend our time being smart. What do I mean by being smart? It's using your education, using your brain to think. It's a novel idea, but to think about the business, to perform analysis, and then surface that analysis to our customer success leader. to our product manager, to provide them with opportunities to get smarter at their job.
Right, right. So we have one question from the audience that I just wanted to pick up. Do you have a recommendation for an executive coach? It's a very, I mean, yeah. Would you be able to? I mean, not just recommend, but maybe help them identify like how to identify one.
I do. And so my executive coach is named Lori Ogden Moore, and I'm happy to introduce you. She's a very busy gal, but I'll drop my email in there, or you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to make an introduction to her. She's truly tremendous, wonderful human being and wonderful coach. I think if I lucked out with her, and it came through my network, right? You'll hear that from most people, that the people they meet who are most valuable to them often come through their network. But what I will say is ask around, find out people who've used an executive coach that you think learned from it, and find their executive coach, which whoever asked that question, have just done. You've done the right thing. Don't just go online and Google executive coach or go on LinkedIn. Find someone who's benefited from that individual.
Right, right. I bring this slide back as we are kind of nearing to the end of the session. If you loved what you just heard, and if you want to meet Dan and also probably listen to this and also meet other VPs or finance directors or leaders in finance, go ahead. Medha, can we just drop the link for all the audience so that everyone is able to register? I think I'd already done that ahead of time. Just that I think I dropped the my developers are probably going to be really mad that I dropped. Just 1 second. I'm just gonna yes, there you go. So you could register. We only have about 25 openings. It's going to be an apply to attend. We're going to be screening people to attend this networking session, plus the fireside chat with Dan and Anil. Just one more question. One more thing before we kind of move on to some more questions. Again, this is being sponsored or brought to you by Spendflo. If any of you are interested in, I've just launched a quick poll. This is more of interest gathering. If any of you are interested in a free savings analysis from us to know how much we could help save on your SaaS spends, feel free to just go ahead and respond on that. I think, let me just see if we have more questions. Any other questions that you want to pick up, Dan? I think those mostly, yeah. So I think one point, maybe I just thought I'll bring it up. Harish has a question saying, I keep hearing CFO is getting, renamed as Chief Value Officer, as most of the picking and audit and compliance work is getting automated. What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
I love it. It's a huge compliment to the folks out there in the role. Value is a great word. I think it just points to what we've been talking about here, Navas, today, which is that the CFO's primary role is to create value for employees and shareholders, to make sure that the company achieves that goal, which is why most companies exist, right? And any stakeholders. And so you could call it the Chief Value Officer for sure. I like that. I might steal that.
Right. I think with that, we don't have a lot of other questions. That probably brings us to the end. But Dan, thank you so much for doing this, taking time out of your schedule. And thanks everyone for joining in. I know it's like the last, it's Thursday and probably just awaiting one more day of the week. But thank you so much for doing this. Hope you really liked it. And if you are looking for other sessions, go ahead on Spendflo and probably connect on LinkedIn. Let me know if you would be interested in similar topics, right? Like, we'd love to host other folks as well. But thank you so much, Dan, for taking the time out. I really love this. I think this can become like multiple blog articles by itself, right? I think each of the questions that you answered can become blog articles by itself. But thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, Navas. Great questions, and thanks to everybody who joined. Find me on LinkedIn and say hi.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and we'll see you in the next webinar.